Good afternoon. Today I'd like to talk about proper drawing techniques to achieve masks that have islands. By an island I mean an area that's surrounded by metal. So how would you draw that to get the results you want if you're going to take this data and convert it to Gerber and have it photoplotted? One way to do it would be to draw the contours. For example, here I have a zero width closed polyline that defines the outer contour. And this is the inner edge of this frame, and then here are some circles that define the holes, and then I have another circle and a circle, and I have 4 polylines with width. So that looks pretty good, and if I hatch it, I'll get the drawing I just saw before. But this is not going to produce a good output. What will happen is if I just dump this DXF file to the Gerber converter, I will get a black area defined by this outer guy, because the Gerber converter doesn't know anything about the relative polarity reversals that these guys imply, and in some cases it's even confusing. For example, it's not clear whether this guy is a scratch or a paint because he traverses both regions. So while this seems intuitive, it is not the best way to draw. We're going to introduce a concept called paint and scratch. What is this concept? We're going to organize the data by layers, and each layer will be assigned either the property of paint or the property of scratch. The outermost becomes our first paint layer. What that means is that everything inside of that is going to be filled solid. Then we're going to put this guy, this guy, this guy, and these 2 guys on a scratch layer, and they'll cut out from that. We'll put this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy on a paint layer, and the last step we'll have one more scratch layer with this circle here. Let me illustrate that. We're going to start by taking our outer contour and put it on a layer called Paint 1. When it gets processed into Gerber, it'll be filled like this. Let's go to the next step. Now we're going to take these 5 boundaries and put them on a layer called Scratch. They'll get processed independently. When we merge them with the first layer, we're going to tell our program to merge them as a Scratch layer, and they'll essentially cut away whatever black was painted here. So think of these as being painted with a razor blade that cuts away anything that's under them. The net result is our mask will now look like this. In this step, we're going to take the circle and the 4 bars and put them on a layer called Paint 2. These will all be painted in black like this. We're almost there now. Let's go to the last cutout. For our final inner cutout, we're going to put this circle on a layer called Scratch 2. It'll scratch away the black circle area, leaving just a ring. We will have the mask that we were instructed to create. The important thing to remember is that each change of polarity gets its own layer. You must start with a paint because you can't scratch away from nothing. The order is important. You start with the outermost, paint, then you scratch away, and then if you have something inside the scratch region, you paint again. Let's actually run an example. What I've set up here are 2 versions of the same pattern. This one has everything on a single layer called copper, and this one has paint, scratch, as we've described. So now we'll run them through our Gerber translator and look at the resulting masks. We start by selecting the DXF file, and notice I've put in units of millimeters. And now we'll configure our translator. So we'll set our Gerber settings to millimeters. 0.3 is sufficient. And then for translation options, we'll have basically 274x is what we want. Click OK. And now we'll set some apertures. So we'll create a new table. I'll just set this first one as a 01 round. I'll set these 2 as our polygon external. And now let's decide what layers we want. Copper for the one with all of that. And then these 4 guys. We want to use our outline mode. Now there's one more step that we have to do. That is to create a merged Gerber file called Copper 2. We're going to select, we have to get the order right, and we mark this as paint, scratch, paint, scratch. So now let's start our translation. Let's not worry about the warning. Let's look at some of our Gerber files. So if we look at the pattern on the left where we had everything on one layer, we'll see that the finished mask is just a solid block. But if we look without any fill, we see that all the data that we drew is there. The outer one is covering everything else. And that's not really what we want. Let's look at the merged file we created. Here is what the merged file we created looks like, and this is exactly what we wanted. If we turn the fill off, we'll see that we have essentially the same thing. The difference being is that we produced a number of different Gerber files, and the program processed them independently and told the processor that this is a paint, and scratch. We can see that in the internal layer list. The copper2.pho that we created by merging the 4 layers includes the LPC. This is the scratch layer, paint layer, scratch layer. This is the basic principle behind paint and scratch. Whenever you have designs where you have a lot of islands, this is one of the ways that you can achieve your desired results. Thank you.